Pakistan ramping up diplomatic efforts to engineer a resumption of talks between the US and Iran, with the current ceasefire set to expire in under a week. No date set yet for the next round of talks, but Islamabad says Washington and Tehran have expressed willingness for a return to negotiations. The White House suggesting Islamabad could be the venue again. A delegation led by Pakistan's army chief is in Tehran, a senior Iranian official reporting a narrowing on some differences, raising hopes for an extension in the existing ceasefire and grounds for another round of talks. The official, however, emphasized that the two sides are still divided on long-standing issues, and that would include Tehran's nuclear ambitions. But Iran is well under pressure as the US blockade on its ports in the Strait of Hormuz hits a third day, with threats as well of sanctions on importers of Iranian oil. On attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon, Pakistan sticking to its line that Lebanon should be included in the current ceasefire, which has not been observed by Israel, the IDF not halting attacks despite Tuesday's meeting in Washington between Lebanese and Israeli officials. The US president says leaders will speak today. A report citing a senior Lebanese official says Beirut is not aware of any upcoming contact with Israel. And our correspondents have been tracking the latest developments for CNA. Toni Waterman, live from Washington, D.C., and Hira Mustafa in Islamabad. Let's start with you first, Toni. Pakistan says the U.S. is willing to hold talks with Iran, although nothing has been fixed at this point, not even for sure on the venue. What's holding Washington back?
Well, the U.S. has signaled that it's interested in more talks, but it hasn't publicly committed to anything yet, even though we know there are these indirect negotiations that have continued since last weekend's talks in Islamabad. Part of what is holding Washington back is that it doesn't just want another round of talks for talk's sake. It wants another round of talks for a deal to be brokered, and it wants to see some movement on Tehran's side coming closer to the U.S.'s cast iron red lines. It really wants this unwavering commitment from Tehran not to develop a nuclear weapon and for all of the existing highly enriched uranium to be removed from the country. Iran, of course, views this as being quite excessive in these demands. It also wants the Strait of Hormuz to be immediately reopened to international shipping. Of course, we have this ongoing U.S. naval blockade, which is meant to push this economic pressure on the country, which is highly dependent on oil exports. CENTCOM, U.S. Central Command, saying that 10 vessels have been turned around and that 0 ships have been allowed to break through since this blockade started this past Monday. The question is whether this is going to work, whether economic pressure can achieve what military pressure so far has not, and whether Iran is willing to concede more in these negotiations. The Speaker of Iran's parliament, Mohammad Ghalibaf, saying on social media, resistance and Israel are one soul, both in war and in ceasefire. So it seems as if for now they are maintaining this resistance against these demands.
All right, thanks for that, Toni. Let's take a very quick dip now to what's happening in Washington. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, joining us with his regular briefing on what's happening on the war on Iran and the current ceasefire. Let's take a listen.
You are digging out your remaining launchers and missiles with no ability to replace them. You have no defense industry, no ability to replenish your offensive or defensive capabilities. You only have what you have. You know that, and we know that. You can move things around, but you can't actually rebuild. You can dig out for now, but you can't reconstitute. But we can. We are reloading with more power than ever before, and better intelligence, even more importantly, better intelligence than ever before, as you expose yourself with your movement to our watchful eye. We are locked and loaded on your critical dual-use infrastructure, on your remaining power generation, and on your energy industry. We'd rather not have to do it, but we're ready to go at the command of our president and at the push of a button. This blockade, which the chairman will detail this morning, is the polite way that this can go. Your energy is not moving and will not move, and we can do this all day. But it's not destroyed yet. Your energy industry is not destroyed yet. You like to say publicly, Iran, that you control the Strait of Hormuz, but you don't have a navy or real domain awareness. You can't control anything. To be clear, threatening to shoot missiles and drones at ships, commercial ships that are lawfully transiting international waters, that is not control. That's piracy. That's terrorism. The United States Navy controls the traffic going in and out of the strait because we have real assets and real capabilities. And we're doing this blockade, performing it with less than 10% of America's naval power. The math is clear. We're using 10% of the world's most powerful navy, and you have 0% of your navy. That's real control. And we have a long track record of dealing with pirates and terrorists. But there is an alternative. As our negotiators have said, you, Iran, can choose a prosperous future, a golden bridge. And we hope that you do for the people of Iran. In the meantime, and for as long as it takes, we will maintain this blockade, successful blockade. But if Iran chooses poorly, then they will have a blockade and bombs dropping on infrastructure, power, and energy. And at the same time, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and our friends over at Treasury are launching Operation Economic Fury as well, maximizing economic pressure across the entirety of the government. To Iran, choose wisely. The world watched, and so did you, as the U.S. military moved seamlessly from major combat operations to a world-class blockade. We can make that transition again, very quickly, and even more powerfully than ever. At the direction of President Trump, the War Department will ensure that Iran never has a nuclear weapon. Never. We'd prefer to do it the nice way, through a deal led by our great vice president and negotiating team, or we can do it the hard way. We urge this new regime to choose wisely. Speaking of choosing wisely, a note to the press corps, to the American media. As I just can't help but notice the endless stream of garbage, the relentlessly negative coverage, you cannot resist peddling, despite the historic and important success of this effort and the success of our troops. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what side some of you are actually on. It's incredibly unpatriotic. This same press corps, not this exact same press corps, but at least an older press corps, bent over backwards during the Biden administration to explain away the disastrous and disgraceful Afghanistan withdrawal. You called it the greatest airlift in American history. It's almost like you're cheering only for one side. This past Sunday, I was sitting in church with my family, and our minister preached from the book of Mark, the 3rd chapter. And in the passage, Jesus
and Pete Hegseth giving his regular briefing on the war in Iran, currently on ceasefire with about 6 days to run to the expiry of the ceasefire. Toni, hearing Pete Hegseth there speaking about the U.S. position, its strength, the strength of its position, how would you sum that up?
Yeah, he really doubled down on what the U.S. military has accomplished, which I think that people on both sides of the aisle, whether they are in favor of this war or not, are not in disagreement about. There have been great military successes. He was talking about how the U.S. military is now closely monitoring what's going on in Iran, what the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is actually doing during this lull in these attacks, saying that they are monitoring the military as it's digging out bombed out facilities. And there has been reporting in recent days that Iran has been digging out some of these buried missile launchers. The defense secretary also saying that, we can do this the polite way, in his words, which is this blockade that then is meant to be pushing the Iranians into further negotiations with the United States, or we could do it the hard way, in his words. And he talked about this possible scenario, if a deal is not reached, of a blockade in addition to bombs falling out of the sky, and then also reiterated that the U.S. would start attacking Iranian infrastructure, things like its energy and power grid, things that, of course, would be potential breaches of international law. He told the new regime, as he called it, to choose wisely, and then, of course, was talking about, again, these successes, and that the U.S. military right now, in his words, is maximally postured to restart combat operations if this deal is not reached. So really trying to re-exercise the strength of the military and what it's been doing. And of course, we heard from President Trump in a social media post about a week ago that as the ceasefire is happening, that U.S. forces that remain in the region are resting and reloading and are ready for their next conquest, in his words. So really trying to lay the military pressure on Iranian officials as these talks are happening behind the scenes, and as the U.S. is not really exercising its military might right now as it's trying to choose a diplomatic path.
All right, Hira, you heard Toni there. The U.S., it's unequivocal that it has achieved military success. But to bring Iran to a genuine position where there might be compromise might require more than just military success. And Pakistan has been very active on this, the army chief and the prime minister making trips to Tehran in the first case, and also to Saudi Arabia and Qatar. What's Pakistan achieved on that front to bring these two sides closer together?
Well, absolutely. In the past few days, we have seen Pakistan has intensified its diplomatic outreach, and now the country's army chief, the Field Marshal Asim Munir, is currently in Tehran and is trying to bridge the gap between the warring parties and is trying to find a middle ground. What we're hearing from the officials in the capital is that there is a significant headway when we talk about Iran's nuclear program. Currently, both the parties are stuck on a 5-year uranium enrichment plan to 20 years uranium enrichment plan. Iranians say that America's demand of stopping Iran from the stockpiling of the uranium enrichment for 20 years is unreasonable. So Pakistan's military chief, who is in good relationship with the current U.S. government and who is being praised by U.S. President Donald Trump on multiple occasions as his favorite field marshal, is trying to bridge that gap and is trying to find a middle ground. And through different sources in the capital, we are hearing that there is a major breakthrough is expected in the coming days. We also heard from the Foreign Office spokesperson, Mr. Tahir Andarabi, earlier in the day, in which he said that extension of ceasefire to Lebanon is also one of the key demands from Iran. So Pakistan is also trying to convince both the warring parties to look out for diplomatic channels to stop this ongoing conflict in the Middle East.
All right, Toni, here referring there to one red line, so nuclear weapons, nuclear program in Iran. Another red line, which Israel might be harder on and Washington perhaps less so. It's what's happening to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So we've had conflicting accounts of whether or not Israeli and Lebanese leaders might actually talk today. What's the latest on that?
Well, according to President Trump, the Israeli and Lebanese leaders are going to be speaking on Thursday. He didn't provide any details in this social media post, like who exactly is going to be speaking, and neither Israel nor Lebanon have confirmed such talks. And in fact, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has spoken to the president of Lebanon, and the president has given this statement now on those talks, and there is no mention of any sort of impending phone call or anything like that. that with Israeli leadership. President Trump, though, is clearly trying to build on this week's historic trilateral talks between Israeli and Lebanese ambassadors here in D.C. that was moderated by Secretary Rubio. And Trump saying on social media that he's trying to get a little breathing room between Israel and Lebanon. Lebanon has made it very clear that true peace negotiations really can't begin until there is a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy in Lebanon. But attacks on either side have continued. A senior Lebanese security official telling Reuters that an Israeli strike has severed the last bridge linking southern Lebanon with the rest of the country. And Pakistan's foreign ministry has said that a ceasefire in Lebanon is essential for U.S.-Iran peace talks. So all of this is very much interconnected, which is why President Trump is pushing for these talks to happen and to happen very fast ahead of really committing, at least publicly, to further negotiations with Iran.
All right, thanks for that. Toni Waterman from Washington, D.C. And just before that, Hira and Mustafa live for us from Islamabad.